Okay, so deep under the Greenland ice sheet, there's a ghost of the Cold War, a top-secret nuclear-powered city that the U.S. Army built and then just left. For decades, it was pretty much forgotten. But now, as the ice begins to melt, that frozen tomb is threatening to unseal its toxic secrets.
So, picture this. It's the late 1950s, the Cold War is in full swing. U.S. Army engineers are pulling off something that sounds like it's straight out of a movie. They're not just building a base on the ice, they're literally carving a massive city inside of it. Its name? Camp Century.
But this thing wasn't just an engineering marvel. The whole project was built on a deception. And when the Army eventually abandoned it, they left behind a toxic mess they assumed would be frozen solid forever. Well, now climate change is rewriting that script, and we're on a collision course with a Cold War secret that is slowly but surely thawing out.
So first up, what exactly was this place? To really get the secret, we have to start with the cover story, the incredible nuclear-powered fortress known as Camp Century.
We are not talking about some tiny outpost here. This was a whole subterranean network of 21 tunnels. It was a complete city, with housing for 200 soldiers, labs, a hospital, you name it. And to power this whole shebang, get this, they used the world's first portable nuclear reactor, which they had to drag, piece by agonizing piece, across 138 miles of ice. The official story, the one they told the public and even the Danish government, was that Camp Century was all about science. It was an Arctic research station, a place to test construction techniques and run experiments in one of the harshest places on Earth. But that, as you might have guessed, was only part of the truth. See, all of this was a prelude to something far more dangerous. Because underneath that veneer of science, Camp Century was really just a proof of concept for one of the most audacious and frankly terrifying military plans of the Cold War.
The science was real, sure, but it was basically a smokescreen. The real mission was something else entirely, a project so secret its name wouldn't be declassified for decades.
The real mission was called Project Iceworm. The plan was to use Camp Century as a blueprint to build a massive, hidden complex of tunnels and launch sites. And why? To hide nuclear missiles from the Soviets, survive a first strike, and then retaliate with absolutely devastating force.
And the scale of this was just mind-blowing. This wasn't about a few missiles. The Army planned to hide up to 600, that's 600, nuclear-armed missiles under the ice, each one pointed straight at targets deep inside the Soviet Union.
And the complex itself would have been staggering. It was designed to cover an area 3 times the size of Denmark, with thousands of miles of tunnels connecting all the launch sites. The idea was to constantly move the missiles around on underground railroad tracks so the Soviets could never possibly know where they were. It was designed to be the ultimate checkmate weapon. But this multi-billion-dollar plan, one of the cornerstones of America's nuclear strategy, was based on one simple, but, as it turns out, catastrophically wrong assumption.
So here's the fatal flaw. The Army thought the ice sheet was a solid, static block of ice. You know, like a giant frozen rock. It's not. Glacial ice is what's called a viscoelastic material. It's much more like a river flowing in super slow motion. Under its own incredible weight, it constantly moves and deforms, and it crushes anything that's buried inside it.
And they learned this reality the hard way, very quickly. Within just a couple of years, the tunnels at Camp Century were literally being squeezed shut. By 1962, the ceiling in the nuclear reactor room had dropped 5 feet. They had to constantly jack it back up just to keep it from collapsing. The ice was winning.
So, faced with undeniable physics, the Army had no choice. Project Iceworm was a total bust. In 1967, they shut down that reactor, abandoned Camp Century, and just left the whole city to be entombed by the ever-moving ice.
But they didn't take everything with them, not by a long shot. In their haste, they left behind a huge amount of waste, creating an environmental time bomb that is now ticking louder than ever.
I mean, just look at this list of what they left behind. It's staggering. Over 50,000 gallons of diesel fuel, vast amounts of sewage, toxic chemicals like PCBs, and, most concerning, low-level radioactive coolant from the nuclear reactor. It's a toxic cocktail spread over an area the size of 100 football fields.
At the time, nobody batted an eye. The logic was that the relentless Arctic snow would just keep falling, burying the base deeper and deeper, and locking all that waste away in a permanent frozen tomb for eternity. Problem solved, right?
Wrong.
They didn't plan on one huge thing, a warming planet. The Arctic is warming faster than anywhere else on Earth, and that perpetual tomb they were counting on is now starting to thaw.
And listen, this isn't some problem for the distant future. The thaw has already started, which has created a really complex ticking clock and a legal and diplomatic nightmare that now involves multiple countries.
This timeline really puts the threat into perspective. So, the base gets abandoned in '67. Fast forward to 2016, and scientists start sounding the alarm. Their climate models predict that if things keep going the way they are, the ice melt could start exposing all this hazardous waste as early as the year 2090.
Which, of course, leads to the million-dollar or probably billion-dollar question, who pays for the cleanup? The US built it, but it's on Danish territory, which is now self-governing Greenland. The original defense treaty never even mentioned environmental cleanup because, well, no one thought it would ever be necessary.
So, in the end, what began as a top-secret US military project has now morphed into this incredibly complex international problem. This is a challenge that spans generations and national borders, and it's a perfect example of how Cold War decisions are creating brand new dilemmas in our age of climate change.
And all this leaves us with one final, pretty unsettling thought. Camp Century is just one site. The Arctic is dotted with abandoned Cold War bases and waste dumps. As the Great Thaw continues, you have to wonder, what other forgotten secrets and what other toxic legacies are just waiting to be revealed by the melting ice?